There's no tea in this cup. This is my coffee cup from this morning. I'm sorry that I lied to you. It's just a prop that I used for the thumbnail, but there is tea in my soul cup, and we are going to be spilling that today as I talk about my worst books of 2023. It was actually quite hard to put together a list of worst books this year. There is only one book of the year that I feel like truly offended me. It is the first 1-star rating that I've given, I think, since 2020. So as you can see, I was not a fan. But aside from that, like, something you need to know about me is that I cannot be uncomfortable. Like, if I am not enjoying something, I cannot expend any energy on it. And if it's something that I have to read, if we're talking about books, then my brain just switches off and I stop retaining that information, and I just do everything I can to get through the book. It's a real struggle because, like, sometimes, like, I just wanna read. Like, I can read a 300-page book that would usually take me a day, but because I cannot be uncomfortable for a second, it takes me forever to get through them. So I managed to put together a list of 5 books that are my worst books of 2023, and none of these books I particularly hate. Some of them are just not particularly to my tastes, but they are the books, I guess, that I feel the most passionately about in a negative way from 2023. So, like, something I especially didn't like, or I went in with high expectations and they really let me down, or something similar to that. So aside from the 1-star review that's going to be coming last, which is actually my ultimately worst book of the year, we are going to be going in no particular order. So my first least favorite book of the year, I'm going to put the Unbroken in by C.L. Clarke, but I actually rated the sequel to this, The Faithless, a little bit lower. So I guess technically that's the one that belongs on this list, but for the sake of this video, like, my issue with book 2 is the same as my issues with book 1. So we'll just talk about the Unbroken. I read both books because I was a co-host for a book club for the second book, so I had to catch up and read the first book. This is actually a book that I was anticipating for some time. I'd heard some pretty good things about it. It is a military fantasy following a soldier called Terrain, who is one of a group of children that was taken from the country that she grew up in, and she was taken to this country called Ballader and indoctrinated into the army. And it was kind of like this project that they did to not like rehabilitate, but to take children from other countries and raise them within the ethos of their country and treat them as one of their own. Even though that never happened, these kids all faced like oppression, prejudice. They didn't have like equal rights to like normal citizens, and they also obviously faced a whole ton of racism. But our main character Terrain, like, she actually believes that this country that is colonizing like a whole continent are doing it with their best interests in heart. Like, she believes in this country's ethos. So when this company of soldiers is sent back to the country that Terrain is from and asked to quash a rebellion, like, Terrain is all for it. We do have a second perspective in here, which is Luca, and she is the Balladeran princess. Her goal is to get the throne back from her brother, who he's holding it as regent, but he keeps saying that Luca is unfit to rule. So she is trying to prove to her uncle that she is fit to rule by quashing this rebellion, and ideally she would like to do that diplomatically. So she recruits Terrain to kind of go undercover in this rebellion and see like what can be done to get the rebels to stand down. I really liked the general plot line of this book, and I also really like how heavily political it is. My real issue with this, the reason why I don't like this series and I will not be continuing to read book 3, is that the characters are also heavily motivated by their emotions and also by their relationships with other characters. There's a sapphic relationship in here between Terrain and Luca, which is one of the main draws of the book, like, for a lot of people, and I just did not believe it at all, because for the first half of the first book, like, yeah, they spend some time together, but I don't feel any chemistry between them really. It seems like mainly a relationship of convenience, if nothing else. And then the whole second half of the book and also the sequel are on a little bit of a different trajectory, and so I just never truly believed that the connection that these two made would withstand all of like the really big events that happened throughout like these two books. I think that C.L. Clarke's writing is not necessarily cold, but I think that their talent is definitely more within writing like the world, the plot, and the politics than it is with the characters. So the real issue that I had is that every decision that Terrain makes in these books turns out horribly. Like, the worst possible outcome for any decision, even if the decision seems fine. And Terrain makes these decisions based on their relationships with other people, whether it's Luca or like childhood friends or potential like family members. They're all hinged on relationships but C.L. Clarke's writing is not emotive. It's not a writing style that lends itself to building a strong emotional connection between the reader and the story and the characters. So when Terrain is making all of these decisions, and Luca as well, but especially Terrain, I don't believe it. Like, I can't believe it because C.L. Clarke has not made me believe in the strength of these relationships. So it was actually just very frustrating to read, and I found the characters' motivations hard to get behind because I didn't feel like, to me, they didn't feel like a valid reason for them to be doing any of the stuff that they were doing in this book. A fantasy romance that I really wanted to like is The Song of the Marked by S.M. Gaither. This is one that's recently been traditionally published, and I kept seeing it in Waterstones and it kept drawing my eye. In the synopsis, it was compared to Throne of Glass and also Blood and Ash, which are two series that I've enjoyed, Throne of Glass especially. And so I was intrigued and I pretty much bought it and then picked it up immediately afterwards. It's about this young woman who I believe is a thief, and she goes on these like big missions to get this flower to give to her mother, or her adopted mother, who is dying of this fading sickness. Now our main character also has that fading sickness, and one day when she's, because this flower only grows in like a very specific location, and when she goes to get it, she's kidnapped by the captain of the King's Guard, who sees that she has the fading sickness but somehow hasn't died of it, and asks her to look into a way to potentially rid the world, like the realm, of the fading sickness for good. The interesting thing about this book, or the not interesting thing about it, I guess, is that on paper this seemed like something I would love. The comparisons in the synopsis, I liked the banter between the main character and the love interest, I liked the plot twist at the end, even though by that point I wasn't invested enough to like for it to really hit me. But this first book was so unengaging that I could not tell you a single thing about it. Like, I have had to rewatch my wrap up of when I read this book to give you a synopsis, because I could tell you nothing about it except that I vaguely remember somebody having electricity. Like, it's like I never read that book, and I think because for some reason I just felt like I was gonna love it, and also because it has so many solid elements but none of them ever really came together in a way that was actually enjoyable, just like really frustrated me. So it's not that I think that this book was necessarily terrible in any way, it's not that there's any one point about it that I didn't like, it's more that just it was so utterly unengaging and forgettable that I'm like salty about it, because it's not a small book, and even though it has all of these elements that I enjoyed, like it was in one eyeball and out the other, because I read it with my eyes, I didn't listen to the audiobook, and I'm mad about it, I can't lie. And also the comparison to Throne of Glass and From Blood and Ash, I understand why it's compared to them, because it has some of the elements, like the main character is essentially Selena Sardothian, and the banter between the main character and the love interest is pretty similar to the Poppy Hawk banter you get in Blood and Ash, but I would never ever recommend that you read that book based on your enjoyment of those series, because I just feel like you would be super disappointed. We also had For You and Only You by Caroline Kepnes, which is the fourth book in the Joe Goldberg series, which I do this to myself, I admit it. I pre-order these books, I read them straight away. I am so invested in Joe Goldberg, even though I know from the last book that Caroline Kepnes is just doing me dirty at this point. So books 1 and 2 in this series, two of my favorite books of all time. I love what Caroline Kepnes has done with this series by putting you in the mind of the person that's doing the bad thing to like the degree where you low-key empathize with him as he's doing awful things. I love how it makes you feel about yourself, and also the way, like, just the element of like the manipulation of perspective within that, I guess. But this series is following a guy called Joe Goldberg, who is a stalker. All of the books are told in second person, so it's like they're being narrated to the reader, like it's like you stepped out of your car, you got on the train, and that adds like obviously like an extra level of discomfort to the story. But Joe seems like a stand-up guy on the surface. He's like super sensitive, super sweet, like artistic, intelligent, and he works in this bookstore in New York. And one day this girl comes in and he becomes infatuated with her and begins to stalk her. Now everything in Joe's life just really snowballs from there, and I feel like book 2 was like a real upgrade on book 1. Like it was the same, but it went to that extra level. And then books 3 and 4 I feel like are just a repeat of the same thing over and over and over again. It feels like we're resetting Joe back to like level 1 and watching him climb to 100 before he just like resets back to level 1. I'm not feeling like a proper culmination of consequences of the actions of the previous books by the time we're in book 4. And actually book 3 did something slightly different to what books 1 and 2 did, but book 4 was pretty much exactly the same as book 3. There was very little different about it aside from a new setting and new side characters, and the only thing that actually changes book by book is that Joe becomes less and less, not relatable, but it's harder to empathize with him because I feel like he's getting colder per book. And the real interesting draw of these books for me was that he remains such like a compelling character throughout all of this. So what's happening now as we're getting to book 4 is that Joe is becoming less and less compelling while the plot is getting less and less interesting, which means that there is very little keeping me reading this series. So obviously, having rated books 1 and 2 5 stars, I think I gave book 3 4 stars, and then I gave book 4 a very low 3 and potentially a 2. It's not looking good for this series. So this is on here pretty much because like the expectations were here and the book was like way down here. The next one is one that I read way back in January. It was one of the first books I read in 2023, to the point where I actually forgot about it until I was looking back through everything I've read in the year, and that is Priest by Sierra Simone. Now Sierra Simone writes really, really good smut. Like, I read a smutty novella by Sierra Simone that I adored. It was called Supplicant, and the way that it was written was just beautiful. Like, the comparison to like classics and art and like how that related to the smut and also the like forbidden taboo romance of it, I loved it. So I had great expectations for Priest. If you don't know what Priest is, it's priest smut. Like, Sierra Simone writes smut. Priest is about a priest, and so I was all for it. But what I didn't know is that this book wasn't just smut, it was also trying to be a romance at the same time. And I feel like it should have been either a smutty novella that was just like absolutely filthy, or it should have been a, not necessarily a wholesome romance, but it should have dialed down on the smut and focused more on the relationship element of the story, because this is essentially about a priest who, big content warnings in here, because his sister was sexually abused by the priesthood as a child, and then she committed suicide. So he goes into the priesthood trying to be what a priest should be for his community, to kind of heal the damage done by the priesthood in regards to his sister. So he was like a regular young man before this, and this event in his life has kind of changed all of his values and what he wants from his life, and he's gone into the priesthood also as a way to deal with the grief of the loss of his sister. So this woman comes into his confessional one day and she's like, "Father, I've been a naughty girl," and she tells him in great detail about a affair that she has been having with a married man. And he, when he sees her and when he meets her again, because she's new to the community, he is just like absolutely taken by her, and he is trying to reconcile his feelings for this woman that he shouldn't have because he's a priest, with his dedication to the priesthood, like, in his vocation. Now, I'm not religious. I feel like it's important to know when we're talking about this book. I was raised as a Catholic, but I don't necessarily believe in religion as a construct. But still, my main issue with this is that it goes from what I assumed was going to be smut, and the smut in here is really good. I will always give Sierra Simone that. I really enjoyed the smut, especially in the beginning, like the earlier instances of it in this book. But from the moment that this woman walks into this church, she has absolutely zero respect for the fact that this man is a priest, and she is behaving inappropriately in a way that you never would towards a priest in general, but also to somebody who you respect. Like, there is literally zero respect there, and that would be fine if it was just going to be smut, but the way that this book tries to then be an unproblematic romance, I could never get behind because of the way that this was initiated, with her having absolutely no respect for him and his vocation while also trying to seek the help of a priest. So I feel like if this would have been one or the other, like if it was a romance, a straight up romance, it would have, I guess, been a Christian romance, and that's not my thing, so I would never have read it. But then if it was, on the other hand, it was filthy smut, the lack of respect that she had for his vocation would never have been an issue. But the way that it tried to turn into like a romance with a happily ever after building off this base, I just really could not get behind. And then finally, my only 1-star read of the last 3 years is another romance that actually features religion, which I swear is a coincidence, because actually I do feel like the religious elements in here are done a disservice, as with Priest, but in a very different way. And this one is The Intimacy Experiment by Rosie Danan. This one is about a woman who has started a sex positive startup company that has like an online subscription to it. It's about education educating people about sex, and she wants to bring this into a physical like teaching role in universities and community centers and places like that. So our love interest is a rabbi, and he is looking to get more people into his congregation because it mainly comprises of older people, so his congregation is dwindling. So he asks the main character to come and teach a series of lectures on modern intimacy to try and draw younger people into the synagogue. The main character very reluctantly agrees because it is alluded to that she has issues with religion in her background and the way that she was treated by her religion, because she is also Jewish as she was growing up, because she actually has a background in the porn industry, and it is alluded to that that was something that like she was pushed out of her religion for. I say alluded to because not a single thing in this book was well developed. It felt like it was hooking you in with all of these things. Like it felt like it was going to be a sex positive discussion on religion and modern religion and how a lot of religious practices are outdated and don't fit in the lives of like modern people in 2023 or like the 2020s in general. And it just felt like it drew you in by saying it was about all of these things and then didn't follow through on any of these things. We also have a woman in here who has worked in the sex industry, who is kind of still working in the sex industry in a very different role and has faced a bunch of prejudice because of that. And I feel like that is never like fully addressed. Like it forms the main conflict in this book, but it's never, I feel like, truly resolved. I think that the way that she is gunning to take her business into an in-person teaching role, I think that she really does herself a disservice with her own actions at the end of this book that undermines anything that she worked for. The relationship in this book, I feel, is based on the fact that they are attracted to each other and there's no compromise within their relationship. There is no moment where they come together and think like, this is the conflict and to resolve it we're going to do this. And because there was nothing, I felt like, connecting them, no chemistry between them aside from that they were attracted to each other, I just didn't see how they could form a lasting relationship that would result in them actually, you know, like being a couple and realistically building a life together. My reason why I disliked this book so much, why I gave it a 1 star, is not necessarily because I'm super salty about anything. I just feel like this book was a missed opportunity that had so many elements that could have created poignant discussion on so many areas, especially when we're putting religious into a romance that isn't a religious romance. Like it's not a religious romance in terms of like it's super clean or anything. It could have been a little bit more progressive in the way that it had like this theme of sex positivity and this theme of religion. Like it could have had so many interesting discussions around these things. And I just feel like it didn't. So the reason why I gave this 1 star is that I just don't feel like this book did anything well. Like even if you took away all the issues with it, is it a compelling romance? I actually don't think it is. And anything that formed any sort of the plot, I feel like there was no kind of like progress made there. Everyone was just backsliding constantly. So those were my 5 least favorite books of 2023. I am sorry if you enjoyed any of these books. As always, I mean, I don't need to say this because I'm sure y'all know I don't mean any offense. I'm not saying that any of these books are awful. I'm just saying that my experience with them personally was not great. I don't get super, I feel like, heated about books all that often. I actually really struggled when I was putting this video together because my method, like when I read a book I don't like or when I watch something I don't like or experience something I don't like, I immediately just pretend it never happened. So I do always find it a struggle to like actually remember like, okay, what was it that I didn't like this year? But down in the comments, I'm not gonna ask you a question because, oh no, I can ask you a question. Ooh, but what if it hurts me? Okay, let me know down in the comments what your least favorite book of the year was. If you know it's a book that I love, maybe don't go so hard dragging it, although typically I'm not actually that offended when people don't enjoy my favorite books because like an opinion's an opinion, you know, like everyone has them, it's fine. But down in the comments, let me know what your least favorite book of 2023 was. And aside from that, guys, please do not forget to like this video if you liked it and subscribe if you wanna. If you head to my description box, you'll find a link to my Goodreads, Instagram and Twitter if you'd like to follow me on any of those, as well as a link to my Bookish Candle website, the Etsy for that, and a 10% off discount code. But that's it from me today, guys. Bye.
Oh, you bite your friend like chocolate. You say you'll go where nobody knows, with guns hidden under our petticoats. We're never gonna quit it, no, we're never gonna quit it, no.